Hello, my name is Michael Hacker, and I'm a Cloud Solution Architect for Microsoft State and Local Government. In a prior video, I did an Azure Remote App overview that described what Azure Remote App is and some of the different configurations that you could do with it. I thought in this video I would make just kind of a quick presentation on what the end user experience looks like for Remote App, and then talk briefly about how I actually set it up. Now, the scenario that I was using for this specific demonstration really relies on an Access database. So I've got an Access database that I have multiple users on premises utilizing. Now, this Access database is actually connected to an on-premises SQL server, and we're utilizing data from tables in that SQL server. And so this Access database really is more or less being used for basic front end to that data and some reporting. Now we see this all the time in many different organizations that'll use an Access front end for just some rapid application development to data that's in a SQL server. Now, if we want to bring this though into Azure Remote App, we've got a couple things that we have to think about. Number one, the Access database has to be in a place where all of these users can access it. Number two, we have to make sure that the Remote App instance can get access to on-premises resources so that Access database can reach back into the SQL server and get access to that data. So those are two important key features that we have to have. So the reason why we want to use Remote App is to allow people on different types of devices, whether it's a Mac, an iOS, an Android, a Windows device, to be able to access the information and reports that this Access database can provide. And I want to make sure that they can do this from anywhere, not just on premises. So let's take a quick look at what this kind of looks like from an end user experience. So I'll go ahead and I'm launching the Azure Remote App client. Now this is the Windows client. Of course, there's different clients for iOS and Android devices. You can just go ahead and download those from their respective stores. I'm going to go ahead and get started, and I have to enter in an email address for the user. So go ahead and do that, and then it's going to redirect me to my sign-in page. Now, my organization is running ADFS, and so it's going to ask me to log in using my ADFS credentials. So here I have my login screen. Now this is my ADFS server that I'm running with Azure Active Directory Premium. So I'll go ahead and log in here as my user and type in the password correctly. And it'll allow us in. And now what Remote App is doing is going out, and the client here is going out to Remote App and taking a look to see what type of apps are available here. So looks like there was an update to the client, so we'll go ahead and allow it to update. So here we can see several applications that have been published for my demo user through Azure Remote App. Now I've got the Access application that I published. I also published a couple other things here that I could use to test out. Now, the interesting thing about the Access application that's been published is it's not just launching the application, but it's also launching the specific database that I wanted to use. So if I go ahead and click on this, it's going to first ask me to log in with my credentials. Now, because I'm accessing resources in an on-premises SQL server, I need to enter in my domain credentials for my Active Directory on premises. So I'll go ahead and do that. Hit OK. And it's going to take a moment for the Azure Remote App instance to start here. And as you can see here, it says it's starting and it's going to be starting access. So it's just going to take a moment. So I'll go ahead and minimize the other client out of the way. And as soon as this finishes getting started here, what we're going to see is the actual Access application right on my desktop as if it's running on this local computer. So there we go, it's loading. And it'll take just a moment for it to come completely up. And what it has to do is connect to not only load the application, but also connect to the application database and also the backend database server. So there's a few things that has to happen here. So this appears to be just another application that's running on my Windows desktop. It looks like a local application, but in reality, this application, this Access Database application, is running on a server in Microsoft Azure as part of my remote app instance. Okay, this database, though, the actual database file that is being loaded to show you this call logging database, is actually stored in an Azure Files location. So I needed to have a central place to put the actual Access database itself that everybody could have access to. And since I'm utilizing cloud services, I decided to go ahead and use Azure Files, which is an SMB file share that can be used by RemoteApp and the Azure Virtual Machine. So I went ahead and took the database that connects to tables in a SQL Server on premises and just put all of that on that Azure Files. And what I did is set up RemoteApp so that when I launch Access, it automatically goes to the Azure Files location and opens up this specific database. And as you can see here, I've got some data. I go ahead and hit Next here. You'll see that it loads data. So this is all data coming from a SQL Server that's running on premises. So the SQL Server is not actually running in the cloud. It's running back on my on-premises network. If I come over here to tables, I can go ahead and expand this open, and you'll see that I've got two tables, my call and my contact. If I hover over that, you can actually see the connection string, and you see that it's going to a server in a 192.168 IP address range. So that is a private IP address range on my on-premises network. Okay, so this is the end user experience. You know, for an end user, it's very simple. They just log into the RemoteApp client, select the application that they want to launch, and then it automatically comes up. They do what they would like to do. Go ahead and hit close when we're done, and it goes away. And come back to our RemoteApp client, and then we could run something else. So that's the end user experience. But how do we actually make this work? How do we bring this all together to give this kind of experience? Well, the first thing is we need to come out here to Microsoft Azure. So this is my personal Microsoft Azure tenant. And the first thing that we need to establish is a virtual network. So I've created a virtual network called Hacker Demos. Now I'm using this environment for actually several different types of demos, from Office 365 to some of the Azure Active Directory Premium stuff, and of course RemoteApp. So if I click on this Hacker Demos virtual network and go to the dashboard, what we're going to see is a couple things. Number one, I have a virtual network that is connected to my home network. So this is the Hacker Demos virtual network. Here's my on-premises network, and we've got the site-to-site VPN connection. So this is something that we need to connect between our virtual network and our on-premises network. I'm just using a site-to-site VPN connection. Now there's other ways we could do this. There's some technologies called ExpressRoute that I'm not going to dive into in this presentation here, but just note that there's a few different ways we can make this work. But in general, what I needed is a way for my virtual network to communicate to my on-premises network. Now, in my virtual network, I actually have 3 virtual machines that are running in Azure. I have a domain controller that's also running ADFS. And then the other important one is my web application proxy server. So this is my front end to my ADFS server. So this is how my users are logging in. So when I logged into the RemoteApp and it redirected me to my ADFS server, it was actually redirecting me to my web application proxy server, where it was prompting me to enter in my credentials. And then it validated it against my domain controller. Now, I know most organizations would probably have their domain controller on premises, but for me, based on the way that I do demos, I wanted to go ahead and have my domain controllers in the cloud, just to kind of reduce the footprint on premises. But this VPN connection allows me to have access to all of those resources that are on premises. So once we've established a virtual network and we've got our site-to-site VPN going, the next thing that we want to do is come down here and create our remote app. Okay, so this is where we're creating a RemoteApp collection. Now, a RemoteApp collection is basically a Windows Server image that's been sysprepped that has the software installed on it that we want to make available to our end users. So in this case, I actually utilized an existing image that Microsoft makes available for Office 365 customers, which has the Office 365 Professional Plus software installed. Now you'll notice here that it's connected to a virtual network, my Hacker Demos virtual network. So that means this remote app collection, when it initiates, actually has the ability to communicate across my virtual network, meaning that any of the software that's running inside of this remote app collection can access resources on premises. Now, of course, everything's based upon the user's credentials, so the user is only going to be able to access specific resources which they've been granted permission. So let's take a look at the dashboard here. Once you create a remote app collection, you're going to choose to create one that utilizes a virtual network. And because of that, it assumes that it's going to be domain joined. Okay, so what I did is I went ahead and I domain joined my remote app collection to that domain controller that I have running inside of Azure. Now, since I have a site-to-site VPN, I could have had that domain controller running on premises and it still would work. The next thing is to select that template image that I was talking about, the one that has all of the software on it that we're using. So in my case, I selected the pre-built Office 365 one because that has everything that I need in order to do this demo. So in other words, it has Access database software already installed. The next thing is I need to publish the remote app programs. So what programs do I want to expose to my users of this collection? So those are the applications you see here. So the Access database, the command prompt, Excel, and PowerShell. So those 4 applications I wanted to publish. If I come up here to the Publishing tab, you'll see here those applications. So here are those applications which have been published for use by my end users. Okay. Now let's take a look at the Access one. This one's kind of interesting because it's not only that I published Access, but I also notice that I have a command line parameter. So when it calls Access, it's asking it to go to the F drive, look in the database folder, and open this specific database file. So this is that call logs database that we were looking at. The F drive is actually mapped to the Azure Files network share that I created earlier. Okay, so that's how I'm making this database available to all of my users. I'm putting it into a central share and accessing it. Now, another way I could have done this is if I already have a network file share on premises, I could have just put this database file there and pointed my command line parameter to that location. Now, the way that the F drive is getting mapped is through a way by using group policy. So I'm actually using a login script that I've published in my domain controller to automatically map the F drive to the appropriate location in Azure Files. Okay, so RemoteApp, since it is a server instance and a person is actually logging into it, we can use group policies and login scripts to actually kind of adjust the way things work. So here I have a login script that's just mapping the F drive to my Azure Files location. Now, I know I'm kind of going at a high level with this. I don't want to dive deep into the specifics on how to create Azure Files, etc. There's plenty of other videos and sessions that are out there that show how to do this. I just want to give you kind of a high level idea how we go about making this work. Okay, so now that we've selected the applications we're going to publish, we need to choose what users have access to this collection. So here you can see I have 2 users that have the ability to utilize this specific collection. So those applications that I published can be utilized by these 2 specific users. Okay, so that's really all there is to getting started with RemoteApp. Number 1, you have to figure out your image. So it has to be a sysprepped Windows Server 2012 R2 image that has all of your applications pre-installed. Now, I'll probably follow up later on with either a demo or a video showing how to go about creating your own custom templates. But in this scenario here, I just utilized one that already exists that Microsoft just makes available for Office 365 users. So we go ahead and we get our image. We create a remote app collection. I domain joined it. I published specific apps, and I gave users access to this collection. Now, the only other thing that I might do is come over here to scale. Scale is going to change the performance level of this remote app collection. Now, we have two options. We have basic or standard. Basic is really good for just standard lightweight applications. Standard actually gives you a little bit more capability. So what we look at, really the underlying difference is the number of users that are allowed on a virtual machine instance before we spin up additional virtual machines. So that's really what happens behind the scenes. So basic actually has more users attached to a single instance than standard. Standard has a few less. So that's how we go about setting kind of our scale for the remote app service. Now, the nice thing about remote app is that it does scale out really well. So that means that you don't have to think about the underlying infrastructure, the virtual servers, etc., that make this happen. They automatically spin up based upon your template and make those published apps available to your users very easily without having to think about load balancing or any of that other stuff. So let me go back here and take a look at one other thing here. So if I come up here to storage, I have my Hacker Demo storage. This is the storage account that I used for both my virtual machines and, of course, for my Azure files. So I didn't mention that earlier, but I think if you've worked with any kind of virtual machines in the past, especially in Azure, you know that you have to have some sort of storage location to keep all of the virtual hard drives. All right, so let's take a quick look how I have this set up on premises. So on premises, I actually have a couple of interesting things set up here. One, let me go ahead and launch my Hyper-V Manager. So you'll see here that I have on my on-premises network, I have a routing and remote access server. So this is what's establishing the VPN connection between my on-premises network and my Azure virtual network, okay? So this is what's controlling all of that. So I'm just using a regular Windows server with routing and remote access services installed on it. Of course, you could use Cisco VPNs or other hardware devices that you might have available. Some great documentation out on azure.microsoft.com that shows you how to set up your site-to-site VPN.